Hi guys. As someone who regularly races in VR, I've been struggling a little bit to get to grips with life outside of Fanatec's ecosphere. Why that might be, you may ask? Well, the answer is fairly simple: the Fanatic Formula V2 rim. Now, this wheel is far from perfect, but it does stand up to a direct drive and it has plenty of buttons. It is also fairly affordable, which is difficult to find outside of Fanatic unless you go for one of the budget brands. Now, more options are becoming available to us all the time. However, it's been a rocky road just trying to find that perfect rim. I will be doing a piece on converting a Fanatic wheel over to USB in the future. I'll also be going through a roundup on what I feel are the best formula rims for VR racers. But for now, we're going to be taking a look at the Ascher F64 V3. Now, this is a wireless rim and it has a lot of buttons on it. It isn't cheap, however, so is it really worth this price tag? Well, folks, we're going to try and work that out today. Now, hold on a minute. Did I just say a Simucube wireless rim with 64 inputs? Yes, I did. Not long ago, you could only get away with half that number, but recent revisions of firmware have helped us to get up to 128 inputs. Now, that number is going to be keeping many people happy. In fact, 64 is probably a decent number for us all, and that's the number that this Ascher rim we're looking at today lands on. What always surprised me about the Ascher wheels is they come in essentially a very plain looking box. There's not anything pretty to look at on the outside, but as soon as you open up the box, you're greeted with a little pamphlet, branded stickers, and stickers for your buttons. In this box, we also have stickers for our rotaries. The box is packaged well, so you shouldn't have any damage to your wheel. And the wheel itself looks really nice. It's very professional. Looks are obviously quite subjective, but the industrial finish on this wheel really ticks a box for me. As is usual for Ascher formula rims, you have additional magnets to reduce the force of your shifters if you need them. I tend to like mine a little on the stiff side, so I'll leave them as stock. Looking around the wheel, then we see 64 controls all set out on the wheel. We also have these nice rubber grips, which we'll be familiar with after the review of the F28. We can see an on-off switch at the back and a charging port for the battery. We also have the flappy paddle clutch and the shifters that we spoke about earlier. We can modify the behavior of the rotary switches with the sliding switches found at the back at the top of the wheel. Things that stand out for me on this wheel, especially when comparing it to the F28 V2, is that they have some big improvements to the funky switch. They have these lovely aluminium faces on them, and they have a much better feel than the ones that we had on the F28. The rotaries have a very positive feel to them as well, and you can definitely feel each position of the multi-position switches at the bottom. Now, full disclosure here, I didn't own an F64 V2, but some of the facts that I found out about it I've compared with the V3. The V2 wheel didn't have a wireless option, so if you wanted this, you had to go USB. If you were looking for a wireless wheel, the F28 was the only thing available to you. The encoder switches apparently have a more durable feel to them, and that's great if you're a VR racer. Being able to easily feel when you've moved position is going to be up there when you are making your adjustments in the car. Otherwise, you're not really going to know, and feedback can be sometimes delayed in the UI. The wheel maintains the rubberized grips from the V2, however they've been improved in durability and in profile. The wireless version of this wheel has the ability to change how those rotaries work, and I think this is a nice little added value. On this wireless wheel, we also have the addition of an additional LED. Now, this LED, it tells us when we are charging the wheel, but it's also used when we are making adjustments to our dual clutch. Now, these feature changes, they sound great and certainly help with quality of life. However, if you have a V2, it's probably not worth you upgrading to a V3. Once we're talking about clutches, let's go and have a look at how you set up the dual clutch system on this wheel. You have to make sure that you have the clutch enabled in True Drive. To adjust the bite point using just your wheel controls, you can press and hold the right funky switch for a second. When you successfully engage that mode, the wheel will beep at you and the LED on the right side will light orange. In order to make the actual adjustments, you turn the left-hand funky switch left and right to decrease or increase the percentage. If you need to fine-tune, you can use the right-hand funky switch to do that. Once you're all finished with the settings and you're happy to try it out, hold the right funky switch again for a second. It will give you an audible beep to say it's out of that mode and the LED will switch off. Now the beeps here are fantastic. As a VR racer, we can't see what's happening on the wheel. So to give us an audible notification of when we're in this mode and when we're out of it is fantastic to know we can go racing. We've had a look around the wheel, we've had a play with some of the settings. The only thing left for us to do is to go get this into a game and see how it does. I've mounted this up to a GSI spacer on my Zero Play quick release. I'm not sure if it's the extra weight of the wheel, but I was able to detect quite early on some movement around the wheel itself. Now I thought I had just not mounted up the spacer correctly, but actually there was a little bit more at play here. It was my Zero Play itself. I'm not sure if this is from use over the last few months or if it has been in there forever, but I found that I needed to tighten up the worm screw a little bit in the Zero Play in order to fix this issue. After that, no problems with movement at all. Other than this issue, I didn't notice the extra 140 grams of weight on the wheel over the F28. I did, however, notice all of these additional controls, which are just fantastic. The weight might be a problem for anyone that is using this wheel on a lower powered direct drive. I don't know, I don't have one to test it on. I'll have to tick that box later in the year. Having been using the F28 for some time now, the F64 felt very familiar under the hands. All of my existing binds were working as they did before, however I did have to bind the additional controls. One thing that caught me out when setting the analogs up is that by default in True Drive they're not bound at all. In fact, they're not enabled. I had to go into True Drive and enable them in order for the game to detect them. So I went into iRacing, nothing was working. I had to close down iRacer, go into True Drive and sort that all out. It's unlikely that you're going to be going straight into an online race when you pick up a new wheel, but honestly, this is something that I would have thought you'd just have set up as a sensible default, but apparently not. All of the controls on the F64 are very easy to find in VR, and the new cap on the funky switch is just amazing. Honestly, I can't sing the praises of this thing enough. This is perhaps the first wheel I've used a funky switch for the rotary control. It actually felt like I was using a rotary encoder. The way this cap is shaped somehow gives you finer control over the switch than I've experienced before. As I expected, the multi-position switches are really good in VR. They're very positive. They're quite stiff actually, but that's not a problem. You know that you've moved them and you can't accidentally do so. You will have to remember, however, to turn them at least once when you load up your game. Otherwise, it will be on the default settings for that switch because none of the button presses have actually been registered yet. This is an issue that most people face whenever you have a multi-position switch, so you should be fairly used to that. I really like the feel of the Ascher grips here. They are probably my favourite across any wheel that I've used as far as comfort and endurance go. My only slight gripe with them is that they are a bit of a dust magnet. However, I wipe down and it looks great again, so I don't think it's too big a deal. At this point, I'm just nitpicking. Let's first talk about the elephant in the room, shall we, which is cost. This is perhaps the most expensive rim that I've ever used, and that probably reflects part of the review. It doesn't include the screen in this price, and for many racers, their entire rig costs less than this. Being a VR racer, the lack of a screen doesn't bother me, but it will bother some people. That probably means that they won't consider this wheel even if they're looking in this price range, which would be a bit of a shame because this is a fantastic wheel. One thing to note with this wheel, being that it does have a built-in battery, is it is quite heavy. In fact, it's 100 grams heavier than the F28, which is the wheel I reviewed previously. If you're using a low-powered direct drive, this additional rotating mass might affect it somewhat. However, if you're using a low-powered direct drive, are you going to be choosing a rim like this anyway, given its price? So I've told you it's expensive and heavy. Are there any plus points? Actually, the additional controls, the rotaries, the multi-position switches you have here are second to none. They're probably the best rotaries that I've used, and you have quite a few of them. So having a look at the wheel, we have the two rotary encoders here. We have rotary encoders on the side. We have rotary encoders on the funky switches, and then we have the multi-position switches. That's a lot of additional controls, and they are all of phenomenal quality. Couple these additional controls with the dual clutch, and the extra cost of this wheel starts to make some sense. Then when we start thinking about the on-wheel calibration for the dual clutch, the fact that we now have a rechargeable battery, and the options that we have available to us for customization, it starts to feel actually pretty decent value, at least compared to the F28. This wheel has to be the best that I've used in VR to date. If you're a VR racer and money is no object, then this might be the rim for you. Whilst this is definitely the best formula rim I've ever used, it doesn't come without its issues. I had to update TrueDrive, and yet the wheel initially still wasn't recognized. I had to basically reboot the entire system in order to pick up that I had this wheel attached. When I switched it on, all was good, but it's a little fiddly to get the analog controls working in TrueDrive. Once it's all up and running, there are no issues, but it's still an annoyance. So this is almost a flawless wheel then, but at this price point, would you expect any less? In fact, you would be certainly very disappointed if it wasn't. I had the joy of running with this wheel in the bar first 12 hours. Now I had the ability to change my brake balance, my TC, my engine mapping, all the way through my stints, and that was fantastic. I'll be keeping hold of this wheel for some time so we can do a long-term review on it later in the year. Talking of which, I'll also be doing a long-term review of the F28 and also a side-by-side comparison so you can weigh up the pros and cons of each. Now, I hope you've enjoyed looking through this fantastic wheel together, and if you have, don't forget to hit the like button. If you like what I do on this channel, don't forget to subscribe. It really helps me out a lot. Thank you guys. And on that note, it's goodbye from me for now, and until next time, bye-bye.